Good afternoon. Welcome to the last session of day 2. My name is Avalos, and I have the privilege of serving on the board of ITPC. I thought it would be putting together a really important summit, and I think we should give them a round of applause. We've had 2 wonderful days of discussions of our issues, our challenges, our lessons learned. And I think from this last session, at least one of the groups that I was in really started to talk about the way forward and the kinds of things that we can do collectively to improve the situation regarding access to medicines and IP. So we're going to take this to another level now in this session, and we have a very distinguished panel that represents important organizations that are really there for us to represent us. And so I would hope that we can really have an interactive session, and I won't spend any more time talking, but introduce our first panelist, Tatiana, who's been working in the HIV field since 2009. In 2013, she joined the ITPC-ru team in the position of Senior Program Officer. In 2015, Tatiana became one of ITPC-ru's coordinator in the IP field. She also works in the area of HIV and HCV treatment, procurement, monitoring in Russia and Eastern European and Central Asian countries. Negotiations with pharmaceutical companies in regards to pricing policy, registration of medicines, clinical trials, etc. And she lives in one of the darkest cities in the world. She very much is enjoying the sun here in Marrakesh, and she even has a tattoo of a sun on her neck, and she's wearing sun earrings. So she's going to speak in Russian for us today. So thank you, Tatiana. You're welcome.
Hi, I will give you this excellent opportunity to enjoy Russian language. So. Or not. Okay, I will start in English. I will be speaking from ITPC-ru side, who is working in Eastern Europe and Central Asia region, and my presentation will be focused mostly on the Russian issues. So I need. How does it work? Oh, magic. Okay, this is something about lyrics. It's just to repeat that we decided to work in this field, in field of access to treatment, and nothing is changed now. Окей, мы начали работать в этой сфере доступа к лечению, и ничего не изменилось. Мы дальше верим в то, что каждый человек должен получать доступ к лечению в России и в регионе, и что право на здоровье – это неотъемлемое право, а не привилегия. Возможно, какие-то вещи будут очевидны для вас, но я представляю здесь Россию, а Россия такая очень специфическая страна, где все должно быть проверено на практике. Я вам гарантирую, что все мои данные проверены на практике. Может, вы знаете, что для того, чтобы зарегистрировать препарат в России, нужно провести локальные исследования. Это занимает год, 1,5–2. Everything is fine? Yes? Год, 1,5–2, и это сильно отдаляет препараты от того, чтобы люди их получали. Окей. На моем слайде я изобразила эволюцию комьюнити, эволюцию сообщества в том плане, что вещи про доступ к лечению стали более сложными, что сейчас для того, чтобы добиться изменений в расширении доступа к лечению, сообщество должно быть очень умным, оно должно разбираться во многих вещах, и оно должно быть экспертами и иметь план, как сделать то или другое. Мы начали работу в сфере, мы начали изучение системы закупок препаратов в России в 2010 году. мы поняли, что мы не можем двигаться дальше, если мы не будем знать все сильно в деталях. И с 2013 года мы дошли до того, что мы сейчас являемся большими экспертами в сфере доступа к лечению ВИЧ-инфекции. Каждый год мы анализируем около 4000 аукционов, и мы знаем досконально, как работает система, что нужно для того, чтобы зарегистрировать препараты, что нужно для того, что закупается, по какой цене закупается и сколько людей получает доступ к лечению. Мы высылаем нашу базу данных по закупкам препаратов каждый год как подарок на Рождество фармацевтическим компаниям и нашим представителям государства. И это надежные данные, на которые они опираются сейчас. Наши отчеты являются одними из самых детальных отчетов в регионе Восточной Европы и Центральной Азии, которым доверяют представители государственных структур. У меня есть слайд по доступу к лечению. Это для того, чтобы понимать размер ситуации. В 2013 году доступ к лечению получали 15-20% от тех, кто в нем нуждается, из 800 тысяч людей, которые живут с ВИЧ. В 2017, спустя 4 года, это количество увеличилось до 40%, но около 500 тысяч людей без лечения. Поэтому мы не считаем, что ситуация очень сильно улучшилась. У меня есть слайд, который показывает, мы анализируем данные, и на этом слайде изображено снижение цен за 3 года. Слева показаны препараты абакавир, тенофовир, на которые за последние 3 года снизились цены очень существенно, это 60%, 85%. И справа показаны препараты, которые у препаратов в левой колонке существует много генериков, они конкурируют между собой, и цены снижаются. В колонке справа показаны препараты, которые находятся под патентной защитой, и, как вы видите, за последние 3 года цены на них практически не изменились. Мы на практике проверили, опять же, что если нет конкуренции, нет снижения цен. Очень сложно описать сейчас, почему работать в сфере интеллектуальной собственности так важно, потому что вчера мы все согласились, что это важно, сегодня мы повторили несколько раз, почему это важно. Но с нашей точки зрения работать в этой сфере еще более важно для нашего региона, в частности для России, потому что глобальный фонд окончательно заканчивает свою работу во многих странах региона, и национальные бюджеты начинают претерпевать изменения, и из них нужно платить за лекарства. Экономический кризис заставляет наше правительство считать деньги, и это тоже является фактором, почему нужно думать про то, сколько стоит лекарство. И сейчас растет новое поколение пациентов, которое очень-очень хорошо знает про принципы лечения и про то, какие новые препараты появились. Они ожидают, что они будут получать хорошее лечение и с меньшими побочными эффектами, которые будут очень эффективно. Мы говорим про тот же долтегравир, про ралтегравир и все препараты, которые сейчас находятся под патентом в России. И последний фактор, это как пример, это революция в лечении гепатита, что все хотят чудо-таблетку для того, чтобы излечиться быстро и без побочных эффектов. В России мы имеем очень интересную ситуацию с тем, что у нас большие производственные мощности фармацевтических компаний, которые, как они говорят, могут производить любую таблетку. В целом качество тоже на хорошем уровне, и эти фармацевтические компании генерические заинтересованы, чтобы получить деньги из национальных бюджетов. У них есть местные преференции, политическое лобби и финансовые возможности делать какие-то активности в сфере интеллектуальной. To lawyers, to countries of our region. And the last point, but I think it's the main part of my speech, about resources, about sustainability of this project. I hope some following speakers will be speaking about this issue, about funding, about sustainability and continuation of this work.
Thank you very much.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to hearing about how your local pharmaceutical companies continue to support your work. I think it's an exciting but we wanted to be supporting, so right, so that's good. Our next panelist is Karen Timmermans, and she's a pharmacist by training and has worked with Medicus Mundi in the joint medical store in Uganda. She then worked for the WHO, first as a pharmaceutical advisor, gradually focusing on intellectual property rights, trade agreements, and access to medicines. In the past, she has been based in Guinea, West Africa, Indonesia, India, and the Philippines. Since 2011, she has held the post of Technical Officer for UNITAID, where she is a focal point for intellectual property and access, as well as for hepatitis C and on the strategy team. We're very happy to have her here today with us.
Thank you very much. I want to really start by thanking ITPC for organizing this meeting, for bringing together such a really amazing, wonderful, and very capable group of people, and for allowing me, and for most of today and yesterday, one of my colleagues to be here. It is, if you're working in an office in Geneva, even if you have been working in the country yourself before, it's always really important and really super interesting to meet with people who do the real work, to listen to them, and to be reminded of the hurdles and the challenges that you all face, often day to day. It's really impressive, and it is not only interesting and important to listen to you, but I do want to reassure you that we do listen, although it may not always appear to you like we are hearing, but we do. The second thing I want to say is, sorry, I will talk most on my first slide, and thereafter I will go much more quick. The second thing I want to say is that it's also a little bit, I don't know what word to use, a little bit bizarre, a little bit strange, or something to be standing here, knowing that I sort of, like it or not, de facto represents probably the biggest donor for work on IP and access to medicines. It's a very humbling thing, it's a very positive thing, and UNITAID is very proud of that on one hand. We're proud of it because we realize the importance of working on IP, and we realize the importance of civil society organizations and civil society people doing this work, and we realize that it can and does have an enormous impact. So that's not the side where the problem is. But where it's a little bit more uncomfortable maybe is just realizing that we might be the biggest. Thankfully, we are not the only ones, but still, for an organization that is always aiming at encouraging competition and diversifying the supplier base, to suddenly find yourself being so much bigger maybe than the others, or with so few organizations around, is maybe a little bit uncomfortable as well. But anyway, I'm not sure in how far that it is something that we can change. If we can, we'll try. We would be absolutely delighted to have here a whole row of donors who are all funding this kind of work. But for now, the row is a little bit limited. That said, let me try to see if I can figure out how this thing works and actually move to my next slide. What I will be doing very quickly is to present something which I actually think you all know, that is to sort of very quickly go through the IP projects that UNITAID is funding, and then maybe after that have one or two remarks on that. So the first grant on intellectual property rights that UNITAID was funding, as you all know, is the Medicines Patent Pool. I put some numbers and figures and data on this slide, basically because then I don't need to remember them. But you all know this. It was before my time, but it is nevertheless one of our important projects. The first project that was really very much focused on working on TRIPS flexibilities, and again, I think everybody in the room knows this, was a grant to the Lawyers Collective that started in August 2013. And that was a modest grant, but I think it was, in a way, a door opener. And as you can see on this slide, our second grant for working on TRIPS flexibilities, the grant that funds actually, I think, part of this important meeting, is the grant to ITPC that had a more significant budget and that's just worked with more countries as well, although that doesn't mean that it, because of that alone, would be more important. All our grants are important. Perhaps less well known is that we are also funding some work on TRIPS flexibilities through other grants, to grants that are not doing IP alone. And I think the notable two examples are a grant to Médecins Sans Frontières and a grant to Coalition Plus. Both of them are having a number of activities aiming at increasing access to HCV medicines, but there are components on working on TRIPS flexibilities within those grants as well. And then perhaps last but not least, hopefully there is a next wave of TRIPS flexibility grants. As I think everybody in the room knows, we launched a call last year on requesting proposals to support access to medicines through the use of TRIPS flexibilities. The process is still ongoing, but I guess, as most of you probably have heard, a number of proposals have been approved by our boards for the first phase, and that means that my colleagues and myself are going to work with those grantees. We are going to ask them to much more fully develop their proposal into a full-fledged grant document, grant proposal, and that will go to our board potentially, hopefully, for funding. So what you can, I think, sort of see, and what you may sort of know, especially those of you who know the proposals that are also going into potentially this next wave, many of the grants working on TRIPS flexibilities are actually grants to civil society. We are very happy about that. We think this is positive. We think this is important. At the same time, we are not selecting, we have not selected those organizations because they are civil society organizations. We have actually selected them because they came with very good, very credible, very important proposals. And again, in this audience, I don't know if you take that as a positive or a negative. I personally think it's a positive, but I realize that perhaps some of you would wish that we fund you simply because you are civil society. In our case, that's not the reason. But it is something, of course, that we are aware of and that we fully appreciate and that we are actually proud of. Having said that, so just quickly back to my slide. Why are we funding IP projects? I think there is like 2 or 3 key reasons. The first one being that because of the work that we are doing, we realize that in certain instances that patents can be a barrier to access to medicines, that they can be the reason or contribute to a lack of affordability, that they can hamper the development of important formulations that we need. Anyway, I'm preaching here to the people who know as much about it as I do. So basically, we are working on this as UNITAID because we see that there is a problem, and also because we know that solutions exist that can be used and that can be very, very effective. And that last point is actually, I've told you before, why certain, or that the selection criteria wasn't who is submitting the proposal, but it really was, to a very large extent, what are the proposals that, in the view of the many people who have played a role in assessing these proposals and in reviewing them, that we believe were the most effective ones, that would be having the most impact, and that were the most feasible. And that is really what UNITAID is focusing on impact, on being effective, on finding solutions, and on being practical. So those, I think, were some of the main criteria and some of the main reasons. And then, of course, nevertheless, last but not least, we also are working in this area very simply because it's in our mandate to do that. I think I leave it at this. I have no idea how I went on time.
It's okay, I gave you a couple more minutes because you're the biggest funder.
And,
and thank you for that.
So shall I go on for another 3 hours?
Only if you do interpretive dance, as I told you before.
In that case, I'll sit.
But thank you very much, and we do hope, in all seriousness, we do appreciate your presence here, and we do appreciate all the work that's being done, and I think that you can also go back to your colleagues at UNITAID and tell them how important meetings like this are, how absolutely they must continue to support these kinds of gatherings of people, and that we don't see this as the one and only summit, but the first annual summit, possibly. So please deliver that message for us. It's okay, no promises, but I think it's important. I think everyone would agree it's important. Our next speaker is Jorrit Kabel, and he works for AIDSFOND, an international NGO based in Amsterdam. AIDSFOND both implement programs and function as a donor for HIV-related projects. Jorrit is a pharmacist. He has a pharmacist degree and has worked for several years in pharmacovigilance and was regional pharmacist in one of the northern regions of Namibia. At AIDSFOND, he is responsible for the international grant making, and he is part of the organizational policy team. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I'm here as the actually second donor presenting.
You see how nice we're being
Oh, it's
so
nice.
far.
No, what I would like to do, because of course most of the things are very familiar for all of you, but I thought maybe it's nice to give some more insight in our internal processes. What make us decide to fund this type of work? Because there are quite some internal dilemmas involved before we were able to make such decisions. But first, a quick overview. So as already said, AIDSFOND is both an implementing organization, and actually that's the majority of our work. It's the biggest part of our annual budget. And for a smaller part, we are also a donor. And not everybody knows that, but the funds we are giving away, the reason why we can be a donor is because we have quite a unique system in the Netherlands, that we have a big group of individual supporters who donate every year a small amount of money. And currently it's around 160,000 people in the Netherlands, and they're giving every year 30, 40, 50 euros to support our work in HIV/AIDS. So it makes that on an annual basis we have 5 or 6 million euro unrestricted funds. We can decide ourselves how. Basically, we have national projects, we have research projects, and we have the international project. And of course, this is all under the international work. And normally, it's between 1 or 2 million for each year. So what did we fund in IP funding in the past year? It started actually in 2012. We had one grant. It was for ECWO and the countries mentioned here. And actually, it was our first experience in being involved in this type of work. And as a result of that, actually, we had in 2014 our first round for proposals, and in 2017, so last year, it was the second round. But amounts are much smaller than we just saw from UNITAID. But I think, actually, I'm very proud what I saw yesterday and today, because all of those grantees, they are just listed here as numbers, they were presenting their results and what was achieved with relatively small amounts of funding. I think there were major achievements in all the countries listed here, and I really think, of course, that's what we aimed with this funding, and it makes me proud that we could be part of this. So, of course, this is very clear. This is my story internally when I say, okay, why should we fund this type of work? And because prices of medicines are, I think these are the most important barrier in access. And in the past years, what we see is that the majority of the people living with HIV do live in middle-income countries. And especially these issues, as you all know, are relevant in these type of countries. It's on long-term sustainability, because all those people on treatment, they increase every year, but they will stay on treatment for the rest of their lives. So it is not something which should be solved now. It is something for the next decades, and we have to find a sustainable solution, and we should start now. So everything we could do now to solve it I think it's worth it. There's a clear gap, and it's a bit sad, of course, that there is not more donors investing in this type of work. But it makes for us, it's okay, there is a gap, so we should invest in it. And there's potentially high impact, even with and there were many examples today and yesterday, that with small investment, there we can have big results. But the other side of the story is, as you remember, we get these funds from all those individuals in the Netherlands. And we have almost half of our organization is working to maintain this group of supporters, because they're not coming to us just give the money. Of course, we have to find them, we have to maintain it. So we have a big communication and fundraising department. And what they need to do is they have to communicate on the impact. And that's a bit different than for, that was just said by Karen on UNITAID. It's not only on money, but the impact, because these are individuals and they can give their 30, 40 euros also to another good cause. So they want to have stories that show why their money made a difference in the life of people. And especially when we are trying to recruit new supporters, we really need an elevator pitch, because that's on the street. And we are stopping people and say, okay, do you want to support our cause? And then we have to explain, maybe in 3-4 words, why this is important. And normally it helps if it's an emotional story, because people are touched and then they say, okay, this is something we can give money for. Now you get where I'm going to. Oh, this is one of the examples. It's our most recent campaign. It's in Dutch, but translated it's from love, out of love for all types of loves. So it's a bit different from this topic, but this is showing that the communication department also tried to focus on emotions. This is my last slide. So these are the dilemmas when we decide to support this type of work. Because for these projects, most of the time, these are long-term effects, and often we only see the effects years after the initial projects were stopped already. Another thing is we are an HIV/AIDS organization, and many of those projects are not HIV specific. And of course we can explain that people living with HIV are also affected by other diseases and we should support other things as well, but it's not always specific. And then there is the policy department in the organization and the fundraising department. It's not always aligned, because at the policy department we say, okay, what's most needed in the AIDS response? So where should we invest our money? And then in the fundraising department, they said, okay, what are the topics where we can get most funding for? And that's a dilemma, because of course we need the funding to invest, but at the same time we only want to invest in where the most of the impact is. So this is a balance, and it's always a discussion. Another argument which is used a lot in our organization is this is something that has to be done per country, per medicine. It seems like a lot of work for what? Because where will it end? If the system remains the same, isn't this something we keep doing in the next 10 years without anything happening? And then for HIV, especially in the lower middle income countries, I always get the message that the HIV drugs are there, so people have access, so what's the problem? So why should we invest in this type of work? So luckily enough, I have enough stories and ammunition from everything, all the projects you are doing, so I can counter all these questions internally. But I think this is really, it's only for AIDSFOND, so I cannot say this is similar for other donors as well, but I think there might be, it might be related discussions. But I think what the organizations here can do is to help explain in a better way, or in a more clear way, why this work is needed, what is achieved with it. Yeah, so to make it a bit more simpler also for other donors.
Great.
That's
Thank you
it.
very much.
Okay, thank you.
I think what's really important when we're talking about sustainability is our narrative that this work is fundamental to sustainability. I mean, we will not have a sustainable response without it. And I think we have to do our very best to be able to frame the arguments very clearly in this way. So the people that you have to go back to understand that. It's fundamental, right? Great, thank you. Our next speaker you have heard from a few times, but I'm going to read her bio again. It's Fifa Rahman. She's from the Health Poverty Action in the UK and represents the NGO's interest at the UNITAID board together with Darmid McDonald. Fifa was formerly the head of policy for the Malaysian AIDS Council in Kuala Lumpur and is now doing a PhD in political economy trade-offs and trade-based IP at the University of Leeds.
Thank you. Are my slides? Okay. So I'm going to talk about my role at the UNITAID board. My role, together with Dermot McDonald from Stop AIDS and forgot his other organization, but together we represent NGO interests at the board. And the board itself is the decision-making body of UNITAID, so it makes decisions on what areas to intervene in. We call them areas for interventions or AFIs. We make decisions on budgets and other things like that. So what is UNITAID, or who is UNITAID? It's a multilateral institution funded by United Kingdom, France, Chile, and a number of other countries. And the members on the board include NGOs, representative of African nations, and communities living with the diseases. And its objective is to fund transformative and innovative solutions to global pandemics. Somebody said to me during one of the tea breaks that UNITAID's only job is IP. And this is actually not true. IP is actually a very small amount of what UNITAID does, even though it should probably be larger. So on the board, the pictures of those two people, so the one on the top is Celso Amorim. He's the former foreign minister of foreign affairs for Brazil. And I put his picture up there because I just want to illustrate how important it is to have individual personalities that are supportive of IP on the board. So he's the chair of the board, he's supportive of IP interventions, and that's a significant factor as to why IP projects have been approved. Lelio Marmora is the picture underneath, and he is the executive director, and he manages work at the UNITAID Secretariat. So just to quickly say how areas for intervention are approved, basically the Secretariat will look at where gaps are, talk to consultants and talk to stakeholders involved and experts on whether this is something that they should fund, and then it will come to the board via a resolution, and we will vote on it and comment on it. So IP, or rather mandate to work on IP, is contained in the UNITAID Constitution. So this is important. So UNITAID sort of can't ever shirk away from its involvement in IP. But as I mentioned, it is not the only thing that UNITAID does. A new AFI was just approved on fever management recently, and UNITAID also funds HIV self-testing and a bunch of other things other than IP. So I want to quickly go through the recent developments on UNITAID and IP. In December 2016, the intellectual property AFI was approved at the board. So that's what has resulted in the grants that Karen told you about that are currently being developed. We also have a document called the investment plan, which documents what UNITAID will invest in the near future. And interestingly, delinkage has been mentioned in those documents. So there would be a potential for funding of delinkage advocacy or projects in the future. Now, I think it's important to talk about problems and challenges. There are concerns at the Secretariat in terms of the sustainability of these proposals. And to a certain extent, the fact that UNITAID describes itself as only funding innovative proposals can be a limiting factor, because there are views that, say, work on compulsory licenses or patent oppositions even are not new. But, you know, we as the NGO delegation think that perhaps there should maybe be different thinking. UNITAID possibly needs to change its thinking around this word innovation, because we know compulsory licenses and patent oppositions work, even if they're not new. The next thing is that funding for the second call. So there's 3 projects that have been approved and are currently being developed. We do not currently have funding earmarked for a second call, but myself and Dermot are working very hard on pushing for that to happen. Next is that funding for UNITAID is an issue generally. France and Norway have both cut their funding to us, so, you know, any French people or Norwegians in the room, you know, it'll be useful to lobby your governments to make sure that funding comes up again. So, you know, it is a risk that our funding is threatened. The next thing, and I'll quickly finish, is that it is definitely a risk that funding for the IP call was not 25 million as expected, but instead 15 million, which is a problem. And I'd like to end there.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Morgane Ahmar, who is an advocate on HIV and human rights with ALCS, one of MENA's leading community-based NGOs addressing HIV and AIDS, and also a member of Coalition Plus. Over the past 3 years, Morgane has worked on intellectual property and access to generic treatments in Morocco and middle-income countries, approaches to decriminalization of key populations, as well as implementation and scale-up of combination prevention and testing strategies in developing countries. In Morocco, Morgane led the ALCS successful efforts for the implementation of test and treat, PrEP, and access to generic dolutegravir with ITPC-MENA. She's engaged with NGO delegation at the board of UNITAID and with the developing countries NGO delegation at the board of UNITAID. You're very welcome.
Hi everyone. I'm going to discuss the Global Fund approaches to intellectual property a little bit, and to see what their strategies or lack of strategies are, and the risk of the current approaches for sustainability of access to medicines in Global Fund supported countries. So first, to set the context a little bit, the specificity of governance at the Global Fund is that there is the presence of Big Pharma at the Global Fund board in the form of the private sector seats. And there is also quite a large dominance of the United States at the Global Fund board, as they represent about 1/3 of all Global Fund investments, so they carry a lot of weight. The Global Fund board also has 3 civil society delegations, so representing communities, representing developed countries NGOs, and developing countries NGOs. However, US and Big Pharma have tended to carry more weight than civil society delegations because they have more influence. And one of the results is that there is no IP strategy as the Global Fund that has ever been developed. So what can the Global Fund do about IP? There are several approaches. The first one is to buy generics. The second one would be to join advocacy against monopolies. And the third one would be to encourage countries to use TRIPS flexibly in their countries. So does the Global Fund buy generics? Yes, it does, because it doesn't have a choice. It would not be able to sustain buying originator products. And 92% of ARVs delivered through the Global Fund were generics produced in India. The Global Fund also provides waivers for generic medicines that are not registered in countries to enable access to generics and to be able to buy generics for these countries. One other thing that is noteworthy is the multi-agency effort that was conducted last year or a couple of years ago to enable access to dolutegravir, tenofovir, and lamivudine in a combined version at $75 per person per year. And the Global Fund was one of the agencies that contributed to this access strategy. The second question is, does the Global Fund advocate against IP? And the answer is not really. So it has been vocal on TRIPS flexibility in some instances in the past. For instance, in relation to free trade agreements negotiated between the European Union and India in the past, Michel Kazachkin in 2012 was vocal about it and said that TRIPS flexibilities had to be protected and that provisions in free trade agreements that hampered access had to be removed. However, more recently, the Global Fund has been silent on IP debates, such as the least developed countries' request to extend pharma waivers. So basically, the times the Global Fund has been vocal about IP was achieved due to civil society influence, but it's also been very varying depending on the sensibilities of the executive director, and it's not something that has been stable over the years. The third question is, does the Global Fund support funded countries to remove IP monopolies? So it's kind of, it hasn't really been supporting openly countries to remove monopolies. It has encouraged countries to remove monopolies in their countries using international legal framework and domestic laws. So its use of TRIPS flexibilities is included in some Global Fund key documents. For instance, on the procurement and supply management of health products policies, they mentioned TRIPS flexibilities. In the market shaping, this was reiterated in a document from 2017. And there have been several instances of Global Fund procurement team helping countries behind the scenes to issue government use letters for importation of generics via procurement agencies. But 2 minutes. But once again, these mentions have been on a case-by-case basis, and it hasn't been a long-term strategy. And one of the reasons is that the Global Fund sees itself mostly as a short-term lending agency and not as an agency that can influence policy debates on IP. So my last point is going to be, I'm gonna go fast on this. My last point is going to be on sustainability of access to medicines in countries where the Global Fund is lowering its funding. So you all know that the Global Fund has is giving less and less money to middle-income countries, and that some middle-income countries are transitioning out of the Global Fund. These are also countries that are facing specific access to medicines issues with high prices, with exclusion from voluntary licenses. So the transition from Global Fund of these countries is going to have direct impacts on access to medicines mechanisms. And so the Global Fund in the past has transitioned away from some countries, which has had devastating impacts. So we have been pushing for the Global Fund to have a transition policy, and the transition has been developed, but the transition doesn't really have any access to medicines strategies in it. It has no IP in it. So the main things that they are talking about and their main strategy relies on tiered pricing through access to an online platform that will give access to transition countries to medicines which prices have been negotiated by the Global Fund, but it's not a strategy that relies on generic competition. So we as civil society need to challenge the Global Fund to manage properly transitions to ensure that access to medicines is included in transition planning. And we also have to push our governments to include these elements in their transition planning. So we have to push both at the Global Fund level and at country level.
Thank you very much. And Morgane, is that happening? Do you know the people that are actually doing that at the Global Fund?
So,
just curious.
So I think it's once again, we have been trying to push for access to medicines elements in the transition planning, but I think it's going to be a country by country strategy as well, and that is going to be civil society in countries that are going to have to push both the Global Fund and the governments in transition planning to include these elements and to make sure that IP registration issues, procurement issues are dealt with by all stakeholders before the Global Fund leaves.
Great, thank you very much. Our next speaker is Anele Yawa, who joins us from TAC. He first joined TAC in 2002, and since 2013 has held the position of Secretary General. You're very welcome.
Before I greet everybody, Program Director, I've got 2 requests from you. One, you borrow me 1 minute from your time. And two, I can see that there are those who didn't say anything today, and I think we need to, and others, I think they are sleeping. I think we need a war cry so that everybody can be awakened. So this war cry, it is a struggle song. It is a war cry. But it's in course, I will explain it in English. So I will say, nawe lapho ushaya izandla. It says, wherever you are seated, you are clapping the hands. So it goes like this. Ne? And then after that, I will be like, uzo join. It means you must join the struggle. Nawe lapho ushaya izandla. Kawopende 40. Nawe lapho ushaya izandla. Kawopende 40. Uzo join nawe, join umzabala, join umzabala. Join uzo join nawe, join umzabala, join umzabala. Nawe lapho ushaya izandla. Awopende 40. Thank you. Before I can say anything, Program Director, history will judge me harshly if I cannot say, all power! All power!
To the people.
All power!
To the people.
To the people!
Power.
Amandla!
Amandla.
Away to?
Away to.
Thank you. Program Director. Ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, receive my revolutionary greetings on this august occasion. This occasion, we might take it lightly, but one thing that we forget is that the whole world is watching. More especially the millions and millions of people who are public healthcare users. The millions and millions of people who are turned away from their healthcare facilities. The millions and millions of people who are dying whilst they are waiting on the queue for the treatment. The millions and millions of people who go to their healthcare facilities and who are often turned away because of shortages of medicines and drug stockouts. It is against this background that I'm standing here in front of you today, Program Director, comrades and friends. Mine is simple. I'm not a person of presentations. If Program Director was to give me another 5 minutes, I was going to talk about 3 things. One, it is around building a mass-based movement to advocate for access to medicines. 2, I was going to talk about from single-issue struggle to struggle for social justice, equality, and dignity for all. And 3, I was going to talk about the role of the funders to support the global cause and the shrinking donor funding. But unfortunately, I've got less than 7 minutes, not unless Program Director can give me another 3 minutes.
3 minutes, 3 minutes.
Why are we here, comrades, today? I think all of you, you know that I'm coming from South Africa and I'm coming from Treatment Action Campaign. I am a public healthcare user. Why I am a public healthcare user? It is because I committed a class suicide I rejected all the privileges that were there. Because it can't be true that I lead an organization of millions and millions of people, which is a mass-based movement or a membership-based movement of the poor people, yet when myself and my family we are sick and dying, I go and access healthcare services within the private healthcare sector. Yet the people I lead are accessing healthcare services within the public healthcare system. History will judge me wrong. TAC, the movement I represent, it is a people's movement. We do not take money from the South African government and from pharmaceutical companies, because we strongly believe that you cannot bite the hand that feeds you. It is against that background. TAC in South Africa and in some spaces, we are unpopular because we speak truth to power. We challenge the regime, we challenge the system, we challenge our own government. Because it can't be true that we can be given or we can enjoy being given leftovers. Without wasting your time, Program Director, I think from where we are seated, all of us, we have a responsibility. Drawing from the lessons of our struggles for access for ARV treatment in South Africa during the dark days of AIDS denialism. How did we achieve that? It was because of partnership and working together between the academics, the likes of the researchers, the doctors, the lawyers, as well as those who are directly affected, which is the communities. Without the support of the funders and everybody, we could not have been saying now South Africa has more than 7 million people who are on antiretrovirals in South Africa. TAC didn't achieve that alone. But how did we do it? All of us, I'm sure here, we know that South Africa is one of the countries that was colonized. Through that process, they introduced apartheid, which created divisions, segregations, and at the end of the day, the majority of the people, the black people of South Africa, the majority of them are illiterate, and they've got nothing. They are the working class. But based on that, we learned one or two things during the struggle against apartheid, that the power belongs to the people. And it is based on that where we are clear that in order for us to be able to bring about the change, we need to reclaim the power that we have given to the politicians. It is through the support of the organizations like MSF, Treatment Action Group, who went to South Africa, because already people living with HIV and AIDS were organized. They brought in treatment literacy. Through that process, people living with HIV and AIDS were able to go to the healthcare facility. Let's say someone is having a shingles. When you go to the facility, you will be given calamine. And we were able to say, no, I don't need calamine, I need acyclovir. When someone is having oral thrush, they will give you Panado. You will be like, no, I don't need Panado, I need fluconazole. That on its own created a demand, because when you get in the facility, there is no fluconazole, there is no acyclovir. It's only then that we will ask, where is the essential drug list? Why you don't have it? Then we will take our struggles outside from the clinics to the streets, to the courtrooms, and to parliament, where wrong decisions are taken. I think even in this instance, we need to learn from those struggles to build a mass-based movement that will demand and that will put pressure to our governments and to those who take wrong decisions, so that we can be able to change things around, so that everybody can be able to access quality and affordable medicines. Without wasting your time, Program Director, the other thing that we need to do in this house and elsewhere in the world is to do away with the single issue struggle. The struggle that we are faced with, it is the struggle for social justice, equality, and dignity for all. We cannot isolate the struggle for access to medicines, to the broken public healthcare system. These struggles goes hand in hand. It is against this background that we cannot only focus on HIV medicines. We need to focus on medicines for each and every illness and disease that is there. How do we do that? We need to go back to the communities. We need to empower communities. We need to educate them so that they can be able to take a lead. Any struggle that does not have a face is doomed to fail. We need to put a face to each and every struggle. One great revolutionary that I'm not going to mention here once said, each and every generation has a mission. It's either we fulfill it or we betray it. And in this case, I'm sure all of us here, we are not yet ready to betray the struggle for social justice, equality, and dignity for all. Quick. I think all of us here, we need to thank the funders. If it was not for the funders, we could not have achieved what we have achieved. But also, we need to have a red pen and draw some lines. At times, funders are dictating terms. And as the result of that, in many instances as communities, we don't do what we want to do. We do what the funders tell us. Yes, the program today is saying I'm left with 2 minutes.
I said 1, but who's counting?
Sorry. So what I'm trying to say, comrades, funders must be able to apply flexibilities. As well as we're talking about TRIPS flexibilities, funders must be able to apply flexibilities so that they can be able to meet communities halfway. Just imagine program director, a funder going to a poor community and you begin to tell poor people about the theory of change, MNE. Those people don't know that. These people, they don't know that. All what they know is that we've got a problem, and all what we need to do is to change things around so that we can be able to access the services that we don't access. So without wasting your time, program director, it will be good after this summit, we can get out here with a declaration that we can take it back to our own countries and push back. The only way we can change the situation is only when we take our struggles outside from the boardrooms, outside from the conference hall, we go to the streets and try to identify with the poor people. Push with them, take the struggles to courtrooms, take struggles to parliament. We need to challenge these people because we voted them into power. I thank you.
Thank you very much. You said it all. But there's still more to be said because Francisco Rossi is up. And he's a trained physician and epidemiologist. He's currently the director of IFARMA Foundation, a nonprofit research institute that focuses on medicines access, use, and quality. Francisco is also a consultant for the World Health Organization, Pan America Health Organization, World Bank, and European Union, and he has been on the board for many years and just stepped down. He will be sadly missed. I want to thank you for everything you've done for ITPC, Francisco.
Thank you so much. I must make my presentation in English because translators are very tired. And I am the last, I think.
Solange.
Oh, so I try to be very, very fast, very quickly. And I think my colleague make a very emotional presentation about the role of civil society organizations. I'm going to try to put under discussion very, I think, hard and maybe controversial issues about the access to medicines movement and the situation we are facing right now. And I'm going to maybe make some conflictive statements, but I think it's important to have this space at this moment, after this emotional discussion. Why is important to support NGOs? I think it's a proper question. I remember that, especially in the European Union and some European countries committed with development in developing countries, there is some kind of movement to put the money on governments, because it's very, very, very efficient. If you can change a law, a lot of people is benefited of any movement. I'm afraid it's not really the truth. I was part of a government in Colombia, and I just say we cannot rely on governments, just for one reason, and for sure you have a lot of other reasons. Into the government, there are a lot of negotiations, a lot of commitments, a lot of discussions, and there are a lot of agendas, and in a lot of cases, if not in all of the cases, all the decisions are part of negotiations and agreements and things like that. And at the governments, it's very rare that the voice of the people is the main voice when the decision is decided. On UN organizations, I think there were a lot of arguments before for some of our colleagues. And at the end, the UN organizations has also a lot of agendas, a lot of leadership, a lot of internal discussion, a lot of representation between countries, and a lot of movement into the rules, and I think it's enough. And I think in the previous discussions, especially in the panel in this meeting, we make a lot of argument why we cannot rely on generic industry. Why not? Of course, they are part of the solution, but they have their interests, and their main interest is not the people on the street. And that's it. And don't forget, in the other hand, that there are a lot of civil society organizations in hands of big pharma. There are a lot of organizations working for them, working with doctors, working with governments and things like that, even in the United Nations organizations. So we need to take a very, very strict look on these issues. 1 minute of history, because I think the movement on access to drugs is the son of the rational use of drugs movement, which was born with the essential medicines concept last century, around the 60s, 70s. But by the beginning of this century, and because of TRIPS, the movement moved to IP and access, and I just to mention that in this movement we lost a lot of discussions on rationality of the use of drugs, and we are discussing IP. In some cases we are discussing IP for useless drugs, and it's losing that we need to recover in some way, especially on civil society organizations. And other movements, especially in the last 5 years, I think, is that because of HIV, we moved a lot with the small grants programs in ITPC and in a lot of other organizations, especially by the Global Fund, that created a lot of local capacities with the small organizations. I'm not sure what happened, but we have a proliferation of these small organizations, and one day most of them disappear or move to articulate to the health system providers and be part of this kind of organizations and lose this activism in these discussions. while the people working on intellectual property and other things move to something I call big grants for big organizations, which is more or less that we discussed before about the UNITAID and, of course, other organizations. And in some way, I think just to mention, because there is a lot of discussion about that, is this concentration in big organizations is moving in some kind of encounter, in some kind of confrontation between North organizations and South organizations. That's it. No one decided that, no one said that, it's the situation.
2 minutes.
Two words about the Global Fund, I'm afraid. Sorry. But I think the Global Fund was very functional for the interests of the big pharma. The government of the United States and Bill and Melinda were very important in the decision team. So civil society organizations were pushed for the important things for us, but also important things to create a market where there were not a market, which is the case of HIV drugs. So we were moved to ask for treatment for all at any cost with high quality, and this was a discussion about a lot of discussions we had about the pre-qualification system, which is a matter of discussion and stop. And right now, we are moving to press government to assume financial responsibilities after the market was created. That's it. And the other movement, I think, is part of a discussion, very hard discussion in our countries. We had this discussion in Colombia. Most of the civil society movements were forced to go to be health providers, to articulate with services and to depoliticize. I need to look at the dictionary to this to this word, but I'm afraid it's a problem we have right now with the social movement in a lot of countries, especially middle-income countries. Last but not least, I think we have some kind of division on the access to medicines movement worldwide between radicals and reformers. And I found this phrase in Spanish, el que no cambia todo, no cambia nada. In English is that one does not change everything, does not change anything. And half of our organizations are radicals, half are moderators, reformers, and we still need to finalize this discussion and to make something about that. To finalize, I think it's important to share with you that because of a lot of movements in the last 3, 4, 5 years, we faced a lot of crises in small local organizations. And we realized that even for the call for proposals where we presented the proposal, that these small organizations, locally based, were very important in the past to make movements like the case of Peru and the reduction of prices, even if there is no compulsory license, and the case of Colombia, and the case of Guatemala, and we have a long list, especially in Africa and in Latin America. And because of a huge concentration of knowledge about the situation, the local situation, the IP implications, the local market. I said in a meeting, the people which is more adverted about the situation in Peru is Javier Llamosa, he is here and he is not a lawyer, but any discussion about the law, ask for a pharmacist, which is one of the best informed in the world. And of course, it's people very, very committed, and I think my emotional partner demonstrated it. But one of the important things is that these small groups had a very important impact everywhere. But most of them are out of financial support. IES-Peru, Health Action International Peru, is closing the office, and in Guatemala we face a lot of restrictions by budget, and we have maybe 2 or 3 additional issues. We have an important fragmentation of the movement because of some kind of personalization. Most organizations are one person, and it's part of our problems. And there is some kind of isolation, especially these small local organizations. We are competitors for financing. We must be very sympathetic with funders and compete with us. And I think one of the interesting discussions is about the problem to be technically very well prepared, because these discussions are more emotional than technical, but it's part of the problem.
Francisco, can you wrap up, please?
Yeah. What can we do? I think you can see some of the options we are working on and the solutions we are trying to put on discussion. The networking, virtualization, more scientific-based discussions, not only legal discussions, and try to be research-oriented because there are some funds for research. But just to finish, I think the best option, and we are trying to do that, is promiscuity. We need to work with all of us, and we need to join to all of us. IFARMA is part of the Red Lamp, the network of Health Action International, working with that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francisco. Well done. Wonderful. Okay. I think we all know Solange, and she's going to wrap the session up. Thank you, Solange.
Okay. So, I really struggle to think about what to say at this panel, because in a sense we're preaching to the choir, as Brooke said in our other session, the parallel session. Everybody here knows that there's not enough funding. We understand the importance of civil society. We understand the challenges that are facing us all. And what do? And I think we have had little conversations, and we come to the point of, well, it's the system that's bad. So how do you change the system? And of course, our comrade from TAC has explained how you change the system. You resist. And we're seeing it across the globe now. I just think it's a very sobering time in history, and we need to be very, very reflective and strategic about our next move. I think if we don't do something now, things are going to spiral out of control. So I just wanted to take a step back because, you know, we're not here to bash the few donors that are supporting the work. We are grateful for our friends. We are thankful for the work that we could get done because of them, yeah? But Jorrit and Karen and Akko and all others who are funding this work, when they go home, they are just people. And they're part of us. And they're part of, their organizations happen to be part of the system that we are trying to change. So I thought it would be good for us to take a step back and start somewhere else. So if you could put up my first slide. Sorry, I only have like 4 slides. So I wanted to start here. Do you know who this guy would just click? Or I can click. Oh, yes, I can click. Sorry. Do we know who this is? Maybe you don't. This is a 26-year-old fruit vendor in the streets of Tunisia. He lived in his own world. He lived in his family of Mohamed Bouazizi. Rings any bells? This is a man who was just trying to feed his family. He was trying to sell fruit. And the Tunisian government, in its autocratic way, decided that that was illegal. Whatever the context was, I don't know exactly. But he, in December 2010, burned himself and killed himself in defiance and started the Arab Spring. What we know from the Western media, what they coined the Arab Spring. And I just thought that would be an interesting place to start because, as Anele said, we have to think outside of the bubble. This one act, this one brave act, sparked something across 10 countries and even beyond the Arab world. And I think that we have to consider now how we can resist. And, I mean, people got angry. Are we angry? Yeah, I hope so. And they went and they did things together. So I know that maybe I'm standing here and people, let me just say what you maybe have in your head. People are thinking, oh, ITPC is in a privileged position, it won something, and it's gotten this thing, and we worked with these partners, and we got these donors. Yeah, but this is just ITPC for today. If we don't win, somebody else will win, and we're all in a fragile state. I don't know about your organization, but if 1 or 2 donors say, nah, not this year, we are gone. Right? And who is going to do this work? So I was really trying to reflect on the moments in history that really turned the tide. And I really want us to reflect and think whether this is that moment in time. I was thinking that, a movement starts with one right action at the right time. And this is not just an Arab thing. I'm saying Arab because we're in Morocco, and I think it's appropriate, and it was actually one human being who was a normal, nameless. We never knew who this Mohammed guy was, right? We think of Nelson Mandela. We think of Václav Havel. We think of Martin Luther King. We think of the young man in Tiananmen Square. We think of Mahatma Gandhi. We think of Che Guevara. And I jokingly asked myself, so I wonder if Martin Luther King sent a proposal to UNITAID. Did Che Guevara apply for an OSF grant? So ultimately getting to that question, can we do this without funding? Or must we have the movement in order to get the funding and track the funding? Or do we need to do both? Where do we start? How do we start? Where do we go today? And I was also reflecting on the Make Medicines Affordable campaign that we've started under this project. And I was thinking about the lessons that we've learned. How did we grow from 4 countries to 26? We didn't think about it as a project. Yes, UNITAID gave us money. Everybody knows that. but we thought about what is the bigger social justice issue? What is the bigger banner? How can we grow this beyond a project? How can we form alliances with other organizations in the north, in the south, in the west, in the east, rich, poor, wherever? How can we join with them? We also worked without getting paid. Many of us have volunteered. All of us love our, as you said, theory of change, level of effort. Please explain why this budget line is 60%, show me the 100%. People volunteer their time. There is no way a Geneva salary could pay all the work that we pay for all the work and the hours that we do. I think everybody here knows that. So I'm trying not to read notes and really just tell you where I am in my thinking. It's a very emotional time because I feel like we have to do something now. And I think this summit is the time for us to really start the movement. You know, it's like saying sorry for the inconvenience. We're really trying to change the world. And it's a big deal. And how do you do it? It could be something that can get you into paralysis, or it can get you into action. So I really want us to take the time today, and I will say this even before our sessions tomorrow, where Othman and I think we'll organize civil society conversation and concretely decide what we can do. Because, you know, what makes this meeting different from any other meeting? We go to meetings and you say, yes, we need a prioritized plan of action, right? Everybody says that. It's a normal output for reports. But what makes this meeting really different? How can we concretely start this movement together? And I think that's where we need to put our energy. It's inconvenient. It's not going to be convenient for us because we're going to have to still work without money. It's not going to be convenient for business. It's not going to be convenient for pharma. It's not going to be convenient for governments. And so we just need to really decide in our hearts. You know, like when Anele is speaking, there's something that goes on in your belly and you kind of feel like a fire. I think Loon described it once and he was saying that's what sustainability is. It's not whether or not you can get more money. It's the fire in your belly. Do you feel the emotion, the need? So I really hope that we could leave here this evening, really kind of reflecting on this tonight as you eat your lamb tagine and drink something. Think about how we can move this into a unified global movement, thinking outside of HIV, thinking outside of health. Because I don't know if there's anyone in this room who does not either personally or know someone who has died because they could not get the medicine they needed to save their life. So it affects us all. So I just want to ask, who is with me to make Yeah, you. I'm giving. Oh, I don't need to give that to you.
You're finished?
Yes, ma'am. I'm done.
Okay. Thanks very much, Solange.
Program director. I'm done.
I know we've really gone over time. It was a difficult session, a difficult group to rein in. I had a lot to say, but I think you have a lot to say as well. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for you to talk directly to the funders. I hope the microphones are on. Please, those of you that feel that fire in your belly, please get up and stretch and tell us and tell the funders that are here what you feel you need to say. It's an important moment. Oh my goodness. I know everyone's tired, but I think also it's a good opportunity. So we have funders here, so please. Wonderful.
Karen has heard me at UNITAID many times before on what UNITAID should be doing. One of the advantages of UNITAID, as we've heard, is it has in its constitution an obligation to help countries use their TRIPS flexibilities, including explicitly compulsory licenses. You ought to see the reaction of shock every time this is stated to the UK as a board member, when it's reminded that this is in the Constitution, founding Constitution of an organization that gives money to. But it took us 4 years to get an IP area for intervention at UNITAID. It took us that time, partially because, not because Karen's a barrier, but because others in the Secretariat were convinced that donors would go along with this intervention. And even at present, the size of the money put aside, the willingness of the Secretariat, in my estimation, to fully assess bold strategies is constrained. And I think as a community, we need to put pressure on some of the few organizations that can, in fact, help us do this work. And UNITAID is one of those. UNITAID needs to know that the allotment that it's made was too little. The funding of the 3 proposals going forward is quite likely to be cut back substantially. There's no provision, not only for a second call within the window of this area for intervention, but nothing in the investment plan over the next 3 years that's set aside for IP. So we need, I think, collectively to tell UNITAID that more funding needs to be put into this area, that small projects that are doomed to unsustainability under the current model simply is not good enough, and I hope we can do that. The Global Fund as well. The Global Fund, if we get active in country proposals, if we use CCMs to actually make proposals for law reform in countries, it can be funded through the Global Fund. And we never talk, I think, or rarely talk as a community about how are we actually going to organize a country-level campaign that's supported with Global Fund money for significant periods of time. It has to be done through the CCM mechanism, and we can do that. So I think we need to continue to put political pressure. As valuable as these donors are, as grateful as I am personally to Karen for the work she's done on behalf of our efforts, we still have to send a message to the secretariats, to the organizations, and also to the donors that this work simply has to be funded.
Yeah. Please, let's have a few comments.
Thank you. So I'm Slim from Tunisia. So I feel obligated to give some context on what you asked about Bouazizi. And it's interesting because what actually happened is he was poor and he had no right to be there in the street selling. He has no authorization to sell his goods. So what he did, he didn't care about the law. He just broke the law. So I think it's interesting because you gave this image of courage and abnegation in the way he burned himself. But before that, before burning himself, he broke the law. So just begin by breaking the law. Break all the laws available and bring them the drugs to the people who need them.
Hello, everybody. I'm Babalo from South Africa. I thank you, IP and Marrakesh, for the opportunity. I am a HER2 positive breast cancer survivor. I am actually sent by the civil society that we are talking about, their voice for the voiceless. As we are continuing with the summit, they are watching on the link and they are raising questions. Hence, some of the time you'll see me using the phone because they are asking me questions directly. I am here to plead on the funders to give us funds because they've raised issues like the issue of language as patients. For the first time in their lives, as much as the civil society in our country is trying very hard, they started to understand the issues. They are saying that they appreciate that what they've seen happening in Morocco, given a chance to speak in your own language. Those are some of the hindrances that they have in speaking up and expressing exactly what is it that they would like from the government and all other stakeholders. When we raised the issue, we discovered that as civil society, we have the issue of funding. We can't educate them well because we don't have the necessary funds to meet such issues. They've raised a lot of issues, but they all boil down to funding. We plead with funders that we need this funding because it's not only about access to medicine, it's about them being able to voice what is it exactly that they need so that they can convince the stakeholders of which medicines do they actually need and understanding what exactly is their plight.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just have... So I just had a few comments, two comments to make. It's about the issue of sustainability and how do we define, do donors and how we civil society define sustainability. Is sustainability is it more sustainable to buy big quantities of medicines at one time, or is it more sustainable to try to change the IP system? And I am a little bit worried when I see actually the funding priorities defined by some of the big institutions, including the Global Fund or UNITAID, because we can see that some projects that are actually one-time projects on some purchases of treatments or, for instance, voluntary mechanism initiatives receive very, very large amounts of fundings, while the real IP projects receive 6 million. 6 million, for instance, dollars for the projects funded by UNITAID on truth flexibilities, while voluntary license projects, on the other hand, receive $56 million. And we know by now that voluntary license mechanisms struggle to work without TRIPS flexibilities. So I think it's also a matter of coherence, and I really wanted to stress that about our priorities and how the donors can take the right decisions.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, just to say some very few and brief comments. I think that this issue of funding, we must see that as a political issue always. Because this is, we cannot accept that funding is a matter of lacking or having funding available. This is also political. As Pauline said, money is there. It is allocated in different places because of different priorities, and those priorities are political issues. So this is very important. We cannot accept that the issue of sustainability is our responsibility. It's also responsibility of the funders. After almost 40 years of AIDS epidemic, funders are also part of the problem. It's not only the solution. They are part of the solution, but also part of the problem. And this must be assumed by everybody, because discontinued funding, the way they want, this lack of out of definition of what sustainability is, I think that we don't see a worry, a concern on programmatic and political sustainability of what has been supported and funded so far. So what we are doing in this world? So if people is dying, it's responsibility of the governments, what are part of the problem and the solution, but also of the funders. And this must be very horizontally discussed and not only be a responsibility of the civil society to deal with sustainability. This is a common problem that must be very honestly discussed. But I think that this discussion is lacking so far.
Yep, thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Mike Podmore, Director of Stop AIDS, but also board member for the Developed Country NGO Delegation of the Global Fund. Morgane covered the issues really well, but I just wanted to highlight a few things, and just in part in defense of the importance of engaging in the Global Fund, both at country level but also at board level. The Global Fund board does have Bill and Melinda Gates represented through the private foundations delegation and private sector represented, but it also has 3 strong civil society delegations that have a vote at board level, which is fairly unusual in multilateral institutions, so we've got to use it. So in terms of sort of access to medicines work, the Global Fund has kept itself pretty constrained, doing work on supply chain, very important, pool procurement mechanism, and more recently WAMBO. But there's been a sort of a reluctance to work on issues related to IP. But it's becoming increasingly important. For the Global Fund, ARVs are becoming much larger parts of grants in low-income countries and lower middle-income countries. So it became even more critical there, but also, of course, fundamentally in transitioning countries. And getting IP work and advocacy and funding for civil society to do that work is absolutely fundamental. And Brooke's point about getting civil society mobilized to get those inter-country grants is really important. And ultimately, hopefully, to prevent the abandonment by the Global Fund and other donors of those transitioning countries. But also, we need to coordinate as civil society across UNITAID, and we're starting those discussions, UNITAID, Global Fund, and UNAIDS and others, to ensure that we're having a strong, consistent message on IP across the globe. Thanks.
Please take these messages. Please make the messages that you're hearing in this meeting be the ones, not the ones that you decide together, but the ones that you actually hear from the people on the ground about what's happening. It's really important, and we're glad you're here. Anyone else? We'll give, oh yes, please.
I had maybe 2 points to make. One was, it struck me when Karen said, and this is not about Karen, this is UNITAID's word of innovative and what that should mean, as FIFA said. I'm just wondering if you could come up with an innovative way of funding activist organizations that don't involve them filling timesheets, that don't involve spending 50% of their working time on monitoring and evaluation of people we don't actually have to do that. It is disheartening to walk into a Positive Network office and see all their staff who do the mobilization, do the work on IP, sitting and filling up those forms. There is such a palpable sense almost that funders don't trust the organizations that they're funding. It underlines everything. And I think that if you're going to talk about being partnerships, and this is not specific to you, it's just unfortunate that both of you are sitting there, but it is to all funders that the standards for NGOs, yes, corruption is important, and yes, accountability is important, but there are these standards, these golden standards. You make one mistake and you're out. And I think that sort of relationship between funders and particularly smaller organizations has to change. So I think if we can use the word innovative to also look at how you deal with activist organizations so that you don't actually ultimately destroy their spirit or co-opt them into managerial jobs and apply business, acronyms to the work that they do. I think it's something to think about sort of going forward. In terms of like the collaboration on the IP strategy, I have to tell you that I just had alarm bells going off. Because the $1 pricing access thing for $75 for that small list of countries, if that was an example of coordinating, there is a problem with that. So I'm a little worried if we have some organizations, some funders who have a slightly more radical approach to IP, starting to talk to those who don't. I think we have to really consider that, and maybe that's a good talking point for us tomorrow, and it's good that you've sort of alerted us to this. Because I'd be a little bit worried if those who have a slightly, more, in our view, progressive view on IP suddenly get pushed back towards issues like access programs and price negotiation and differential pricing, and we all find ourselves back in the universe of voluntary mechanisms as opposed to what we're discussing today. So I just wanted to put that on the table.
Thank you very much. Sure.
I'm Mohammed from ITPC-MENA. My question would be, I think we heard that the access to medicine is no more seen under the prism of HIV, but also other diseases like hepatitis C and cancer. Speaking of which, cancer, are you funders planning to fund access to cancer medicine? And if so, how and when?
Okay, great. I think I'm going to give the panel each an opportunity just to answer any question quickly. If you don't have anything to say, that's fine, but I'll give you everyone an opportunity. I think a lot has been said. Okay?
I guess my situation is probably going to be that I have something to say, but I don't have an answer. I don't know if you want to hear that. Probably not. Nevertheless, I think the first thing I want to say is that I will try to take back all of your points and discuss them internally.
Just put it up closer to your mouth.
For whatever good that will be. I think it's also important, and it has sort of been referred to, that you raise these issues through other channels, like that includes the board members.
Maybe you can give her yours.
Put it closer, I think.
It should work. No?
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I'll try again. So the first thing I wanted to say is I will try to take these things back and I will raise them internally. I also think it might not be enough if it just comes through that channel. So I would really encourage everybody to also talk with the board members that are there. I hear you on the timesheets. I think I know very well what you're talking about. At the same time, it's maybe a nice and an easy to understand example of something that maybe will require to be voiced through different ways and in multiple ways and to sort of change. At the same time, I guess it probably is an example that's something that ought to be easy to change. But I'm using the word ought, not is. So yeah, we hear you. We'll try to address some of the issues and we'll see how this goes. But I do think in the end of the day, we are all in this battle together. I think those of us working in UNITAID and probably other donors, we have the same objectives. We want to go to the same point. We want everybody to have access to all the medicines they need as soon as they need them. But we will not be able, unfortunately, maybe to jump to the end goal straight away. From our side, we may have to do a few steps at a time, and we may need some of you to push us to go faster, quicker, yeah, faster. But we'll try. Thank you.
Thank you. Fifa?
I just want to pick up on something that Solange said, that, you know, are you angry? Because you should be very angry that certain countries have reduced funding to UNITAID. And, you know, you should, what I wanted to say, and it was actually on my last slide, is that in-country advocacy with board members, for example, the board member of Brazil, who's normally strong on IP, but it's still more advocacy is needed with him, Nilo Ditz, to push for a new IP call and to push for consistent funding on IP. The African Nations board member is strong on IP when she shows up. So, you know, there needs to be some advocacy to make sure the representative for African nations does come to boards and does read the documents and has a consistent message on IP. So, you know, anger alone, of course, doesn't, you know, it doesn't work. You need anger and action, and that's what I'm calling for, that we need, and I completely agree with Mike, that we need a coordinated civil society strategy on IP with funders. Because it's not ideal at the moment with the reductions in funding and the definitions that are being used for innovative, for sustainable. I mean, there are people talking about sustainable meaning generic companies funding IP work. You know, so, you know, we've got to look at these definitions, and we've got to look at donor countries. So, yeah, that's what I have to say.
To go back to that point of collaboration between donors, so Mike said it as well, that we have to get donors and institutions to work together better. The Global Fund is working more and more with UNITAID and with other institutions that have market impacts, but we also have to make sure that they work in complementarity, because sometimes the Global Fund has been saying that it's UNITAID's role to work on IP, so that to make sure that there is complementarity between organizations and that they're not dropping the ball. And on civil society's role in country, I think in relation to the Global Fund, what I didn't have time to say before is that I think it's also it's going to be our job to try to understand better the potential impacts on access to medicines, because it's IP, but it's also registration and procurement, and we have a lot of work to do to understand exactly what it's going to mean when the Global Fund leaves. A small example, in Morocco, we're middle-income countries that might be transitioning in the coming years. We have access to generic tenofovir through the Global Fund because we have a waiver for registration. When the Global Fund leaves, what does that mean for access to all these medicines that are accessible because of facilities and waivers and all that? So it's technical work that has to be undertaken by the Global Fund. The Global Fund has to support this before leaving, and we need to make sure that access is not undermined in all of these specific ways when they leave.
Thank you. It's on, I think.
Thanks, Program Director. We've got all the reasons to be angry, more especially as poor people and communities, because in our minds we know that we've got nothing to lose, but that are binding us to break. Our organization between 2013 and 2014 nearly closed the shops. I'm sure all of you are aware of that. You know why? It's because we were dictated by the funders. Instead of us doing some interventions on the ground, we ended up chasing numbers. How many people we have reached, how many females, how many males, without us focusing on the impact. Secondly, if we in South Africa, when during the dark days of AIDS denialism and when the prices of medicines were too high, we were able to challenge Pfizer so that they reduce the prices of ifluconazole. It means we can do it all over the world. I'm trying to say, I agree with people who are saying that not all laws are just laws. Some of the laws are unjust, and we need to break those laws so that we can replace them with just laws. Thanks.
Just to comment that I'm very happy because of this open discussion, not ended discussion. And I will try to answer the only question, which was about cancer. To stress a point I mentioned, but I think we lost in the discussions, is about the biological products for cancer and other biological products, which is some kind of wave right now and is the most important growing on the pharmaceutical market. We had a very long discussion led by the civil society organizations about the regulation, and the discussions on biological drugs is not about patents. Patents are very soft in biological products. In a lot of countries are prohibited at all. But they are moving to use the regulation, the registration regulation, to create some kind of exclusivity in the market by putting some kind of requirements for generics. And in some way, maybe you have heard that in biologicals there are no generics, just biosimilars and other words. It's a lie. We are discussing, and it's in the regulation in Colombia, that we need to talk about generics of biological. And on the other hand, we need to stress that it's a scientific discussion. We need to stress our scientific base and to work together with some scientific organizations, but to take into account not only this discussion on regulation. On the other hand, I want to stress that a lot of new cancer drugs added
1 month or maybe 15 minutes for the life with special side effects, and $100,000 with a very, very conflictive result. And we need to be very aware in these discussions and take into account the position of doctors, because maybe 90% of doctors are in hands of pharmaceutical industry.
I think we have two main things to do. We have the technical work. There's the DTG and the what is registered, and there's a whole host of work. And then there's the movement building work. And we have to do them in parallel. I am struck by that question about, so what do you do when the UK doesn't vote, or when, you know, rich countries are up there making the decisions, and why don't they do what we want them to do? Because HIV is not everybody's business. They think it's for them, those other people. And if we need to take this to the streets, we need a proper communication strategy about how this is everybody's business, why this affects us all, and why this needs to be broken down. It's not for lawyers and for fancy academic folks, but it's for everyone. And we need to figure that out, and I think that's where we need to go tomorrow. Thank you.
Solange, and thank you, panel. We appreciate that. We have a few announcements.
As it works. Just one final logistical announcement. If you are leaving tomorrow, please stop at the registration desk at some point this evening so you can check that your departure time is correct. And remember that you will leave the hotel 2.5 hours before your flight. Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening, and we'll be back in the morning. I think we start at 9 o'clock. Thank you.